I'm Bryce Johnson. I'm the inclusive lead for Microsoft devices. I work on both Xbox and Surface devices. Kind of work on our hardware.
I'm Erin Mustin-Fursh. I'm an occupational therapist. I work at Craig Hospital, and if you're curious why I'm here, I will tell you in a minute.
Because she made this thing.
No.
So this is the Xbox Adaptive Controller. I'm sure some of you have seen it. If you haven't seen it, please go to our demo hall. Go to the expo hall in South Hall. We've got them set up there. You can kind of see it in action. And we can show you it as well. We like to call it ZAC. Not all of us do. I do. I like to call it ZAC, Xbox Adaptive Controller, ZAC. It's less of a mouthful. And this is some of the friends that play well with it. The one important thing that we found with this device is that having a rich ecosystem of peripherals is really vital. So where are we going to start? Wait, I had something and then I put it down. Oh wait, here it is. We're going to start with this. This is a traditional Xbox controller, as we like to now say, traditional Xbox controller, classic. We love this thing. I personally think that we make the greatest controllers. Your opinions may vary, but I think they're the best. But if you look at this controller through the lens of exclusion, it's very possible that we need to recognize where this device can leave some people out. And the thing is, this device makes a lot of assumptions about how you use it, right? All controllers do. It assumes that you have two hands to hold it, right? It assumes that your thumbs have a fluid range of motion and that you can hit all these buttons, right? How many buttons are on a controller? Does anyone know? Anyone have a guess? Actually, I'd love to hear some guesses. Just call some numbers out.
24.
Someone saw this before and said 17. Yes, there's 17 buttons on an Xbox controller that you hit with two thumbs and your two index fingers, right? That's a lot of density. That's a ton of density. That's more dense than a keyboard. So the other thing that we assume about this device is that we assume that people have the endurance to be able to hold it all day long, right? And that's something that was really important for us to recognize early in our process, that while we love this device, that this was the barrier. This is how we approach inclusive design at Microsoft. Recognize exclusion. Exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases. As Microsoft designers, we seek out those exclusions and use them as opportunities to create new ideas and inclusive designs. That's how we think about it. The next one, learn from diversity. Human beings are the real experts in adapting to diversity. Inclusive design puts people in the center from the very start of the process, and those fresh, diverse perspectives are the key to true insight. And then the last one, solve for one and extend to many. Everyone has abilities and limits to those abilities. Designing for people with permanent disabilities actually results in designs that benefit people universally. Constraints are a beautiful thing. So those are the principles we live by. And I've already talked about recognizing exclusion with our controllers. So this is where we start the next process, which is learn from diversity. This is Sergeant Josh Price. We met Josh in 2015 when him and Ken Jones came to the Microsoft campus to work with us in our one-week hackathon. And it was so enlightening to kind of work with Josh and Ken, because you can kind of see Josh is an amputee. Actually, Erin, what type of amputee is Josh? Sorry,
you mean,
putting you on the spot.
Oh my goodness, healthcare.
Whoa.
Josh looks to me, I don't know him, but he looks like he is an above the elbow amputee, meaning he does not have an elbow joint. He's missing everything below that.
Right.
Right.
So you can see that Josh basically has a joystick that he puts under where his elbow would be. And then he uses an Elite controller on his hand. And then he has an array of buttons that he gets in front of him. The reason why this was so important and so impactful for us was that, we got to really see what Josh's life would be like if he couldn't play video games. And we have a lot of veterans on our Xbox hardware leadership team, and they got to see what it would be like if Josh couldn't play. And I will say, like, it really fundamentally changed, like, how they looked at controllers. It was super powerful. So powerful that in 2016, we went back to the hackathon. We kind of went away for a year. We had some ideas kind of percolating. And Xbox Hardware's leadership team basically assigned us 3 interns to go into this 2016 hackathon to have a new version of the prototype, to basically kind of iterate on what we did in 2015. 2015 was really hacky. 2016 was a little bit better. We had something. And I'm going to play a video that's of Rachel, who was one of our interns.
People use the ready-made adapter to the Xbox One controller so that if they want to externalize the inputs for their own custom use for their physical needs, they could easily just grab it off the shelf and then plug in some buttons, and it's right there ready for them to use.
So that's Rachel. And if you can hear that music, it's because I have Minecraft on in the background of my PC, and I really am digging it.
We just hope it relaxes you all and kind of sets a mood, okay?
Yeah, super into it.
Yeah.
Let's kind of go on. So, actually, maybe I shouldn't for this one, in all due respect to our partners. But no, you know what, it's fine, it'll be fine. So after 2016, we started reaching out. We worked with Warfighter Engaged, we had some ideas. We started reaching out to other nonprofits and charities. We started working with Able Gamers. And who's familiar with Able Gamers? A lot of people in here, great. A lot of people aren't. So I'm gonna play this video. Please indulge us. It's really important for us to work with these partners, and I really want to make sure that we give them their due.
For over a decade, Able Gamers has been on a mission to bring inclusion and improve quality of life for people with disabilities through the power of video games. And in 2018, we had the honor of helping many incredible gamers. Gaming accessibility doesn't really have a one-size-fits-all solution, however, and sometimes it takes a couple tries to get it just right, as was the case with AJ. AJ has cerebral palsy, a condition that makes holding and using a standard controller difficult. The first controller we gave AJ wasn't a perfect fit, so we went back to the drawing board to make him the perfect controller, which ended up being a much better fit and got AJ back in the game, destroying his opponents. In the process, we found out that AJ's fiancée Regina, a gamer who also lives with cerebral palsy, had taken the first controller, and now they're able to play games together in ways that they were unable to before. It's stories like these that inspire us to create more, and all of this was only possible thanks to the love and support of the generous Able Gamer supporters like you, who are with us every day in the belief that gaming is for everyone. Together, we're changing the world so everyone can game.
I am going to turn that down. That's starting to get out of hand. Minecraft here. Sorry, Minecraft.
Sorry. We'll get there.
We'll get there.
We will.
You just might have to give us a minute to get back to it. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. Oops. Uh-oh. Slide snafu because of Minecraft music. Where were we? So the one thing I will say about Able Gamers, Able Gamers has a service that they offer developers called Player Panels. If you want to get people with disabilities viewing the things that you make, and I cannot stress enough how important that is. The one thing we always say about the adaptive controller is that we designed it with the community. We didn't design it for the community. It's a very important distinction. Able Gamers player panels were invaluable to us. When we did a beta of the hardware, for the first time, Microsoft did an external beta of hardware. We typically don't need to go outside of our employee pool to do betas of hardware. We have hundreds of thousands of employees. But when we did this, we knew we needed to. And Able Gamers gave us 20% of our, they recommended 20% of the people who are in our beta. It's very, very valuable for us.
For over a decade, Able Gamers...
Skip that, we already watched that. So next organization we worked with, Special Effect. So we talked about Able Gamers, they're in the US, Special Effect is in the UK. I think what we learned from Special Effect was that, and all the partners we worked with, that everyone had goals that aligned. Everyone wanted to basically make people be able to play. but their approaches and how they went about it were all different. And when we were creating the Xbox Adaptive Controller, we needed to create a device that not only like worked for one organization, but worked for all of them. And then even beyond those organizations, we had to think about who was going to use it. So the thing about special effect, because you're in the UK, you can kind of like, they can kind of get in a car, they can put an occupational therapist and a technician in a car, they can go to someone's house, they can build them a controller, and they can leave. You can't really do that in the US. The geography of the US doesn't allow us to like have a mystery machine that kind of goes around building controllers for people. It'd be really cool though.
It'd be really cool.
It'd be super cool. So that's how special effect works, and I'm gonna just show you, oh, before I show you the video, the one thing that was also super powerful about special effect is they're really good at sharing the work that they do online. So their Instagram feed, before we actually met them in person, their Instagram feed was basically a huge source of inspiration for us.
It's been yet another amazing year. From all of us at Special Effect, thank you and Merry Christmas!
It's always fun to hang with those people. So,
Oh,
now we're going to get into us.
us. It's me.
So another one of the charities that we work, not charities,
Well, we're a
nonprofits.
nonprofit hospital. We're
Yeah.
a hospital. That's what's, I think, the biggest difference.
And so this was still in 2016. We met Aaron and Patrick here. And I will say that from our very first sort of call, which was this one, I'm a total creeper.
I did not know he was recording it.
So from our very first call, it was apparent and amazingly wonderful that the approach that Craig Hospital had was unique. It was different than Able Gamers. It was different than Special Effect. It was different than Warfighter. And that's what made it so valuable to us.
Yeah, and I will get into why we're unique in a bit, but this first call for me was kind of a proving ground, like in terms of just feeling out. At this point, I didn't know anything really about the project, but it was just a conversation about accessibility and gaming and what we were doing and the problems that we were having. And so for me, this was pretty cool to start having a conversation with someone in the industry and to be kind of speaking the same language in terms of devices and workarounds and things that we were using. Because especially in the hospital setting, sometimes you're taking your best shot and your best guess and you're hoping that you're on the right track. I did stalk Special Effects Instagram page as well. So that's kind of where some of my ideas came from too. But so that's kind of what this meant for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think for a lot of people on the team too, because Craig's in Denver, it's actually the closest to us, up in Seattle. And so we would send a lot of the team there. And so for for many members of our team, it was their primary and kind of initial experience. It was their first sort of foray into this world. So they were really affected by it.
Yeah, and that's something I probably took for granted, and it took me a while to kind of see that impact because I'm in a hospital every day. So there are a lot of things that are like quote unquote typical day for me that the team at Microsoft probably hadn't even been exposed to. So I think it raised a lot of good questions in terms of situations or design ideas even that they might have to account for in a hospital environment.
So I'm showing what I can show you, what we originally told the folks at Craig Hospital. And you can see that some of the things we're talking about are Copilot. Does anyone know what Copilot is? Some folks, Ian does, which is good. Copilot is on Xbox One and Windows 10. It's the ability to take two controllers and tell the system that they're one controller, right? It was one of the things that we did really early on to address this notion of like that controllers are meant to be used by this, like this. So we saw that if we took two controllers and we made them mirror each other on the console, all of a sudden someone could use controllers like this, if you can imagine me having another one. So they could split the inputs apart. And at the same time, we knew we were in the process of developing the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and we do really want people to use the Xbox Adaptive Controller with the traditional controller. So yeah, that's how we kind of got into Copilot there. So I want to kind of go back to this bit, just to kind of reinforce what we talked about earlier when it comes to inclusive design. So recognize exclusion, we talked about that in the beginning. We needed to recognize that this was the challenge, right? This was the barrier. Learn from diversity. We worked with not only Craig Hospital, who are an excellent partner, we worked with Able Gamers, Special Effect, also Warfighter Engaged. Our last charity that we worked with when we were developing this product was the Cerebral Palsy Foundation. They are a wonderful partner. So it was very important to work with them all. We do believe in nothing about us without us. And then this last bit, solve for one and extend to many. So we're going to get into this one a little bit more, kind of as we go on. But the idea is that when we first started pitching this to our engineering team, they kept asking us what the primary use case of the adaptive controller was. What's the primary use case? And we really didn't have a good answer because we knew that the diversity of needs was so great. So what we eventually kind of came to was this idea that this is the primary use case. Our traditional controller is still the primary way that most people will play games on Xbox. But what we needed with the adaptive controller was a device that tackled all the alternate use cases, everything else. And that's what we went and set about to do. So I want to kind of show you some of the bits of our journey here. After the hackathons, we had a pretty big pivot into what was the form of the device. And there's a number of reasons for it, but it was enabled basically because we knew that Copilot was going to be a thing. We knew that you could always use a traditional controller in conjunction with the adaptive controller. And that gave us a lot of freedom to basically explore forms that were quite unusual. As you can see, the device is probably not what you think of when you think about a controller. So these are sketches from the industrial designer, Chris Kajowski, kind of as we started to go down this path. So, getting a little parched. If you can't see, on the back of the device here, there's, like we said, there's 17 buttons on a controller, there's 19 ports on the back of this device. So there's one for every button on the controller plus 2 extras. This was how we determined how big this device was going to be. Once we got to a point where we were reevaluating, we started from a place of basically, we knew that there was going to be this many ports on the device. And it basically determined how wide this needed to be. After that, we started to think about, well, what are we going to do with all this space, right? Because at the time we were thinking about this kind of more like a hub than I think a controller. So we started to think about adding buttons, and we started to explore not only adding the buttons that you need to, all the buttons that are on the adaptive controller are what you need to use the system shell on Xbox One. So if people are wondering if these are directional or capacitive in any way, they're not. They're actually 2 big buttons. They're A and B. And they're meant for people who basically can't hit small buttons. Did you want to say anything about this part?
In terms of just the design of it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think Bryce hits on the fact that you guys were initially thinking of it as a hub, and that allowed a lot of flexibility in the device. And that certainly gives me a lot of creative freedom when I'm trying to match it up to someone, but including some of the buttons and using that space on the top of it functionally in a way that people can actually have access to buttons and inputs has been super helpful. Without saying too much, I will say that there was a lot of discussion around that, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of opinions around that, and feedback we gave them on different ways to do it that they definitely heard, but then understanding that there are always reasons in the design process why certain things work, certain things don't. But I think it just generated a lot of discussion, like a lot of collaborative dialogue about what are we going to do with the top of this control.
So you can also see from these photos of these polyjets, you know, we would write on them, we would sketch on them, we would kind of figure it out. You might notice that the corners of these are actually fairly sharp, which we got feedback on pretty quick from Erin.
I did say I was pretty opinionated about some things. I've been working in occupational therapy for 10 years, and that's given me a lot of time to develop feelings and to learn how to express them appropriately. But while that was a really sharp, sleek-looking design, having those sharp corners, for the people that I work with, that was not going to work well because maybe because of fatigue, they were going to have to rest the side of their hand on those corners, and maybe because of whatever impairment they have, they might not have feeling in the side of their hand that they're resting on, and so that can actually lead to skin breakdown, blisters, actual wounds just from resting in a space or rubbing on a space and not knowing it. So I was pretty vocal about that.
And, you know, we needed to hear that. Because up until this point, we were really kind of assuming that people wouldn't interact with it a lot. But once we did really kind of understand that there was a lot of value in interacting with the device, you know, we started to think about how we could make it more ergonomic, better for playing with. And one of the things that we came up really early on with was the idea of sloping the device. So, you know, these early polyjets, it was pretty boxy. We sloped the device so that you could rest your hands on the table and just kind of lay your fingers on it, or your hands or whatever, and you wouldn't have to like kind of get over this edge. And that was tricky to do because these buttons on this thing are actually pretty big. They take up a lot of vertical room. The ports in the back take a lot of vertical room too, so we couldn't make the whole profile of the device thinner because at the back we basically need it. So we came up with the slope. So this one is pretty far along. I mean, this is pretty much what we kind of came up with in the end, this form. I think what's really interesting about what Erin sort of came to us with was, like I said, we didn't assume that people would interact with it a lot, but when we started looking at it, we started to see things like, well, let's move those buttons like view and menu and the Xbox button out from between those two buttons because you might accidentally hit them as you're going between these two big buttons. And we just increased the overall white space of the device. And it was really important because, sorry, Erin.
No, you're fine.
You know, I always joke that these buttons aren't for fingers, even though they work really well with fingers. We thought of this place where it was like, you could rest your hand here and just kind of rock it back and forth to get at these two buttons. And it felt really good. Like it felt like this place of like where we couldn't accidentally hit things. I think another thing, and this one will be a little bit harder to see, but I will do my best. You know, I talked about Copilot. I talked about using these devices together. We really tried to make it fit so that you could, in essence, hold this and use these two big buttons while you're holding a traditional controller. And we're going to get into an example of that in kind of a minute. So yeah, one of our researchers at the hospital, one of our researchers at Xbox, when he was visiting the hospital, he noticed that a lot of the corners were dented and scratched. And it's a new facility.
Yeah, we just expanded like the year before they started coming, so it's got a lot of love on our walls.
And you know, we asked why this was the case, and the reason is that when you get someone who's like new to driving their power chair, you know, they're going to make some mistakes. They're going to hit a wall.
Run over toes, hit walls, scratch up the mirror in the elevator because they're trying to turn their chair around and don't have a sense of space. So yeah.
So when we thought about how this would affect the Xbox Adaptive Controller, we put some mounting in the system. So you can actually mount this controller to any number of things. If you go to the Expo Hall, you can see some of the mounts that are there. But we envisioned basically people possibly mounting this to their wheelchair. And once we saw that, like, oh, they're going to run into a wall, possibly with this thing attached to it, it actually made us go back to the drawing board and make sure that we kind of beefed up the mechanical engineering of this device. So not only is there a tripod mount, there's a different type of mount, the AMPS hole pattern, and that's used in things like RAM mount. And these are attached to a structure inside the controller that is actually very, very strong. We went back and redid it to make sure that if you did happen to run into a wall, your controller wouldn't like snap off your don't try that though. I didn't,
I tried that.
Did you? Seriously?
Yeah.
Cool. One of the things that was also amazing about this journey was that we got to bring our packaging designers along with it. And when Scott was doing the research, he would basically go to someone's house and he saw them open a Coke can with their teeth because they just didn't have the mobility. And so it basically created one of the strangest design rules for our packaging team. Like one of the principles of the design for the controller packaging was no teeth. So to just kind of go through, I'm going to kind of back up and go through this one again. Oops, there we go. So you just need a finger to basically pull the tape off and the mailer opens up. Inside there's another tape loop, which you can pull up, and then this cloth strap is exposed. The controller sits on a card that also has a loop that you can pull out of the device. You can slide it out. And then the last thing that is in the packaging is the USB-C cable, which is in that little loop, but there's no ties on it. You can just shake it, and it kind of falls out. And the thing that the controller sat on is the quick start guide. So we're very extremely happy with how this packaging turned out. And the team is so excited. It's really changed how they think about packaging. So as we develop packaging for future Microsoft devices, we're really going to see what we can take from this, where it's appropriate, and kind of have it affect our packaging kind of all up. So one thing that I didn't think I would have expected to be as important as it was, which in retrospect sounds silly, is the form and the visual design of this device. We were very focused on empowering people, and what we found when we went out into the world was that, and I think this totally makes sense when you put it, now that we have the opportunity to look at it this way. People didn't want a device that looked too medical, right? They wanted something that looked like what their friends were using. So we really made sure that the Xbox Adaptive Controller felt like a member of the Xbox family. The width of the device, remember how I said before the width of the device is determined by the ports? It also matches the Xbox One S console. So the width of the controller and the One S console are the same. It has rounded edges. It follows our visual design pattern. It looks great. I think a lot of things, when it comes to assistive technology, they tend to look either overly medical, overly homemade, or they can look really childlike. I don't know if you've seen a lot of assistive technology, but
Yeah, colorful and a little infantilizing, I think, from that side of it. And then yes, also overtly medical because they have to be medical grade and they just look different. And people really struggle with that.
Yeah. And so the fact that we created this device to look like it was part of the Xbox family was something that we heard from the community and we really appreciated and we took it. But the fact that when we launched the device, that right away we got tons of feedback about just how non-medical it looks and how it looks like it's part of the family was actually really, really gratifying to us. And it's really taught us a lot about how we think about assistive technology, right? I mean, some people have told us, well, you mass manufacture these, you have an opportunity to do that. I think that's partially true. Lots of assistive technology is mass manufactured. That doesn't mean that it isn't medical.
Right.
So, I think one of the things that's really been interesting is this idea of like, how do we create a device that doesn't stigmatize you from using it, doesn't other you for using this device? That was super important to us.
Yeah, and so I think that's something that I see really frequently in my work. So I'll take a moment to kind of just talk about Craig Hospital and what I do there, and why Microsoft would even think about approaching a hospital on a project like that. Because there are a lot of really great nonprofits out there who are in the gaming world and addressing gaming. But Craig Hospital is it's a rehabilitation hospital. We treat people who've had either spinal cord injury or a brain injury or both, honestly. And what a rehab hospital is basically after you have had a change, you know, an injury, after you've been in kind of the acute medical ICU stages of a hospital, you get kind of like medically stable. But because of that change in your function, you still may not be like strong enough or able to go home and resume things. So a rehab hospital, we really kind of work with people, partner with them to help them learn the skills that they can take with them and kind of go home and be as independent as possible and do the things that they wanted to do before. So I'm an occupational therapist, and that's kind of the bread and butter of my work is understanding what's important to a person and just helping them develop the skills or use the tools to do that again. I think that's the easiest way to describe what an OT is. And I work in assistive technology, which means a lot of times I'm looking at a person's ability to use a computer, to use their phone again, all these things we take for granted, to control their environment, to use a communication device that they can no longer speak. And we did those things like really well at Craig, but we didn't have anything for gaming when I first started there. And so you're gonna get kind of an origin story inside of an origin story here. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about like why I do gaming. I actually worked with a patient 5-ish years ago that when he came to the hospital, his big goal was to be able to play video games again. He'd had a spinal cord injury. He's what we would call a quadriplegic or tetraplegic, meaning that he couldn't move his legs anymore, he couldn't move his trunk. He could move his arms, but he didn't have any fingers anymore. So he's essentially, you know, working in a world of kind of gross motor movement. And he was just really struggling with rehab, and it was because he was a gamer. And at the time, we didn't have the tools to meet that need. And he saw that, it was very apparent, and it affected his participation. So those are the kind of patients that get referred to me in the tech lab. When there's not a solution, they usually come to me. And just through the process of working with this person and understanding his need and being really honest and learning from him and helping him get back to gaming, we saw kind of the power in that, in his ability to participate in something he loved, to relate to his friends in his online gaming community, and that really translated to his overall rehab. So from that one need, we built a whole program because we saw the importance of it, which is kind of an inclusive design thing, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yes. It's parallels. So that was kind of our start to it. And about 6-ish months into it, I think is when Microsoft approached us. And I was pretty skeptical in the beginning. Again, when you work in a specialty hospital doing a specialty area, assistive technology, you get approached sometimes by people who have a project, a passion project, and want to do it. And you see a lot of projects die, you know. And it's a waste of your time, it's a waste of your resources. And there are always reasons. But it also is really disheartening to expose that potential to a patient and then take it away, right? So that's kind of how I came at it, and that's kind of why I was probably a little skeptical in those initial calls. But those calls kind of evolved into some focus groups. Bryce mentioned the team coming out to the hospital. That was really interesting. Having a whole team kind of come in and kind of examine our space and have those conversations. And what I think was really interesting was what they saw in addition to what we said. So again, I take for granted that I work in a hospital, so there's things I don't think about. I don't really see the dents in the walls anymore because it's my day-to-day. So for the team to observe that and then come back and really ask questions about that was really interesting. And then of course we were part of the beta testing with our patients, and that ended up being kind of a really cool thing to offer. Like, if you can imagine being in a hospital, being in an uncomfortable position, adjusting to, you know, a major life change, and just dealing with that, and then all of a sudden, not only do we want you to play games, but we want you to test this cool new thing that's not even out yet, and you're not even allowed to talk about it. So that provided some really, really interesting and good motivation for our patients, and I think helped them see what they could contribute and that their voice still mattered in that regard, yeah. So I will talk about these pictures a little bit, because these are our patients, this is my hospital. I think, yeah, the upper, orientation-wise, upper left and lower right, those two pictures were in the official announcement video for the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And they show two very different people with two very different abilities, and that's pretty typical for our hospital, and so it diversifies our use cases, I guess, in that regard. But again, these guys they're at a game night. We host game nights weekly, and they're able to try the controller and really get a good feel for it and use it to work towards their therapy goals as well. So the guy on the bottom, you can see, like, he really has to work to look up at the screen while he's playing. Like, it's really hard for him to divide his attention between the two activities. So that's like a really good therapy goal. He also was unable to communicate and was using a device to talk, and he had to press buttons to navigate that device. So this controller actually helped him build skill and capacity to use his communication device, and actually eventually to drive a wheelchair, which we weren't sure he was going to be able to do. The guy on the top was actually transitioning between using a power wheelchair to using a manual wheelchair, like he was developing the strength to do that. And again, you know, the big joysticks he's using, the buttons, all the reaching he's having to do is a great way to work on that strengthening. Because if you have someone all of a sudden wheeling around a hospital in a manual chair all day, it's really tiring. And then actually the guy on the bottom was transitioning also between using a power wheelchair, but with his mouth, right? So using a sip and puff or a straw he would blow in to drive his wheelchair, to a hand control to drive his wheelchair. And so the controller actually gave us the ability to have him work on both of those skills and kind of transition between them, which was pretty cool. Okay, this is a photo of one of our game nights. And it's also a photo of maybe a different way to use one of these, right? You know, Bryce talks about assumptions. We assume we have to hold on to this thing, but a lot of my people cannot hold on to this thing. So the gentleman in the picture, he can rest on the table, and then he can kind of use his hands on top of it, use his knuckles, the side of his hands to get to the joystick. He can't get to the buttons on the back, so that was probably a little bit of a limitation before we had the adaptive controller. But now with the adaptive controller, we could actually break those two buttons out and put them somewhere where he could reach them. And then the guy next to him had been one of our patients for a while, and actually was kind of a good example of how people could just start to use gaming as a way to like relate to each other and like have some common ground while they're in a hospital. This is like a pretty heavy setup. This is probably not something you guys imagined using it for.
I think when we talked to everybody, we knew that we couldn't imagine everything that it'd be used for. We kind of got to that place.
Yeah. So this patient had a surgery as a result of his injury that required him to be on what we call flat bed rest for like 12 weeks. So if you can imagine not being able to sit up or get out of bed for 12 weeks, right? That's pretty boring, especially in a hospital. So the adaptive controller really gave us the flexibility to put things within his reach, which actually helped him maintain his strength while he was on flat bed rest for that whole time. The glasses he's wearing, again, it's probably something people don't see. Those glasses actually have a mirror in them, so that the TV's in front of him and he could still see that. That's a pretty low-tech workaround, and a little safer than suspending a TV over top of someone, to be honest. But we actually would bring him down to game night in the hospital bed, wheel it all the way down, so that he could like get to know his roommates and like the other people in the hospital. And again, the flexibility of the controller allowed us to really put things where he could reach them, change them. You can see he's actually using a switch in his mouth that he bites to do one of his button presses. He's got a button on his chest that he can hit, and then he's using a joystick with his left hand. So that's so important, I mean, just for his overall quality of life and his ability to just kind of get through that moment. His final setup looked a lot different because he got to the point where he wasn't up in a chair, he was driving a wheelchair, and the controller gave us that flexibility to mod it.
So those are some really extreme kind of cases. And I mentioned before that last principle of inclusive design, solve for one, extend to many. So we started this device from that place of like solving those extreme cases. But what we found along the way were some really interesting use cases about how to use it for people who might have a less severe condition. So this is my friend, Cherry Ray. She's not here, so I'm gonna like basically just make fun of her. And when this goes up on the vault, it'll be there forever. So, hi, Cherry. So, this is a picture of her. And this is how an idea that she had that kind of came to her for how she can use the controller. Stick presses are really hard for her. It is hard for her to use, to basically maneuver thumbsticks and use them as buttons at the same time. Happens for a lot of people. So we mentioned Copilot before, the ability to make two controllers seem like one. So what Cherry can do is she can take the adaptive controller, she can make these two big buttons into stick presses, and then she can basically just use a controller, and instead of pressing down on the stick, she can just let her hands drop and let gravity hit these buttons. She can lean on them in different ways. You can kind of move it forward and back. That was really powerful for us. And when we talk with people who have like RSI or arthritis or other repetitive stress conditions, we would hear stories like, I play Destiny for like 3 hours a night, and then my fingers are on fire. But those 3 hours are the most important 3 hours of my day, because those are the 3 hours that I spend with my friends. So I ration that time. I am not casual about how I use that time. So we were always just like, well, if you can change the movement from like this to something else, maybe we could give you 4 hours, right? That was the whole point. How do we give someone more time to play? So I'm going to transition a little bit into how do I design for the Xbox Adaptive Controller? So we get this question a lot from game developers. How do I design for the Xbox Adaptive Controller? And here is my answer. Please don't. So what does that mean? Okay. I'm a designer. I don't really believe in prescriptive guidance. I'm not a fan. I don't like people coming up to me and telling me what to do. I like being told what the problem is, right? So when we're talking about creating games for people with limited mobility, I'd rather people ask these questions, apply it to their game, and I believe that if they ask these questions, their games will be better, not only for people who use the adaptive controller, but for people who use like a typical controller, for people who use mouse and keyboard, for people who use other input devices. I think we are getting to a place where we can't design for just one device modality anymore. So I don't kind of want to put out into the world, do this for the adaptive controller. So what are my questions? Here they are. I'm going to go through some examples. We'll kind of get back to these in a bit. Can your controller remapping be as unique as your gameplay? We have robust controller remapping on the Xbox Adaptive Controller. You should still do it in your game. There's a lot of reasons for it. What unique game assists can tune your gameplay for individuals? Would secondary action facilitators hurt gameplay? Can you have fun with simple controls? And I use that word fun in particular, because I think a lot of the times when we're talking about the games that we create, we think about mastery. We think about being able to compete. And I'm using the word, can we have fun? Is precision vital to progression? And my example there is sniper versus shotgun. Are simultaneous actions required? This one I'm going to be a little prescriptive. Please try not to do simultaneous actions. It's very hard for people. Can inaccurate timing be forgiven? Can timing be flexible? So, we got Minecraft here. We got a little creeper coming out of the water. Minecraft's a really interesting example for me because Minecraft has, some really decent controller remapping. There are more actually actions in Minecraft's controls than there are buttons on a controller. So they have to give you the ability to choose what you want to do. There's some things you can't do on a typical controller. But for me, what I really like is this tiny little accelerator, which is auto jump, right? Because now all of a sudden, when I'm going up this hill, I don't have to keep going A, you know? I don't have to do that repetitive action. It's a tiny accelerator that doesn't really affect gameplay, but makes the world of difference to someone who's hitting this button. I'm going to talk about Fortnite. Here's the accessibility menu in Fortnite. I am not going to talk about anything in the accessibility menu. What I'm going to talk about is the feature that they have on console, which is sprint by default. So we talk about simultaneous action. The fact that I can go here and say, yes, I'm going to sprint by default. I don't have to hold that stick down to run. I'm just always going to run. Has opened up this game for people immensely. I know some people who play Fortnite with the adaptive controller. They cannot use left stick. We have a feature on the adaptive controller that lets you assign stick movement to a button. So her name's Melly. She lives in Germany. She puts a button between her knees, and when she presses that button, her character runs forward. So in a first-person shooter or in a game like Fortnite, her character just runs forward. She uses right stick to steer. She doesn't strafe. She doesn't go backwards. She just goes for it. But the fact that she doesn't have to do a simultaneous action and hit sprint by default is a big deal. One stick, 2 buttons, all you need to play. Inside. I love this game. I love the idea of this, you know, that you have such a rich thing, you have such rich gameplay with just the simple controls. I wasn't very good here. I forgot what I had to do. So, and then I remembered, so I sped it up there a little. Yeah, all that, 2 buttons. This is my youngest daughter in front of an Xbox adaptive controller and a monitor demonstrating something we have in a facility we have at Microsoft called the Inclusive Tech Lab. It's Rocket League with no hands. So she has a rock band pedal that she's using for accelerate, and you can see that her knee is between what's 2 buttons sort of mounted to the desk. So she pushes on that rock band pedal, and she steers the car by hitting these 2 buttons. It's very digital. Like digital. So her movement is very specific. The other thing that you can see is by her head, she's hitting a little button. So I said no hands, I didn't say all feet. So she's got that button there, and that's her jump button, is that little head button. And we like this in the lab because it shows a very simple control. The great thing about Rocket League, one of my favorite things about it, is in their controller remapping, they have controller remapping which is contextual to their game. So you can do acceleration in reverse, you can map it to a thumbstick. So it's very possible to play Rocket League with just the thumbstick. You know, you might not be able to do everything, but again, can you have fun? You might not be able to master it, but can you have fun with the simplest of controls? I'm Canadian, so hockey, Rocket League, that's really why. We have to talk about Celeste. Celeste gives you the option to turn on assist mode when you kind of come in. Now, the developers of Celeste said that they didn't believe in assist mode, but I really, really thank them for putting it in anyway. And Celeste's assist mode is wonderful. It lets you do things like turn down the speed of your game. You can turn on infinite stamina. Air dashes you can make infinite, and then you can turn on invincibility. This might not be the game that you envisioned, but for a lot of people, this really opens up this amazing title to them. It's super wonderful that they did it. I like air dashes because I can totally Superman through the levels. Like a Superwoman. Let's talk about Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Here's their accessibility menu. There's some wonderful work in there. There's fantastic work that they did. One of the things that I really like is that you have the ability to change weapon aiming from left stick, or from right stick to just left stick, so you can do a lot with just the left stick. It's great. One stick kind of being able to play. The other thing that they did, which was really, really tuned to their game and just wonderful, was the idea of having different types of difficulty you know, for the types of action you're playing, like combat difficulty versus exploration difficulty versus puzzle. The fact that they have these assists and they're so tunable really makes this game really great. So I just kind of want to get back to this. Can your controller meme mapping be as unique as your gameplay? You know, Rocket League, good example of that. What unique game assists can tune your gameplay for individuals? Shadow of the Tomb Raider has some awesome assists. Really great stuff in there. Would secondary action facilitators hurt gameplay? Auto jump in Minecraft, things like that. Would it really change your game a ton? Can you have fun with simple controls, not necessarily compete? Rocket League, Inside, things like that. Is precision vital to progression? I didn't show an example for that, but I think you'll kind of get it. Simultaneous actions required. One of the great things in that Shadow of the Tomb Raider accessibility menu is it allows you to kind of tone down your QuickTime events. Even though it's something they're kind of known for, they've given you a lot of options for kind of getting by them. This last one is tricky. The example is basically Celeste in the ability to slow the game down. But one of the things that we always kind of hear from people is that they don't necessarily want the game to be easier, they just want to have more time. And I think people with cognitive limitations can kind of just need an extra second.
Yeah, just to kind of figure out, navigate, process, and react without dying. Yeah.
So I really want to kind of do a demo, and then, but I also really want to make sure I have time for questions. Actually, maybe I could do a demo later if someone wants to see it. I have this button here. But maybe we can line up for some questions, and I'll try to do the demo at the same time. Is that cool? Does anyone have questions? We would ask you to go to the mic. If you can't go to the mic, just shout your question out, and we'll repeat it. No? No questions?
No questions.
That's
Oh, here we
freaking me
go.
out. Yeah, thank you.
The first one's the hardest, right? Oh boy.
Okay.
Now there's a fight.
It's a total softball. I want to know where you can get them.
Where you can get them.
You can get the Xbox Adaptive Controller at any Microsoft store, at Microsoft stores online. So if you go to the Westfield Center, just like a block from here in the Microsoft store, they have them.
And are they available in other countries, or is it you?
So we're available, I don't have the countries listed off the top of my head, but we announced in Mexico City that we're working on expanding them to more of the world. So we're going to have an announcement in the future about that. Sorry, I'm gonna try.
But like right now? Can you?
Right now,
Yeah.
it's like US, Canada, a lot of parts of Europe. You know,
Cool.
I think kind of typically what you would expect.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Right ahead.
Please.
I just wondered how you got from, you know, getting the product out to a Super Bowl commercial.
Oh.
I don't know. Sorry, Dean. You know, I think what I can say is that the response has been, we've had heaps and heaps of accolades. It is super appreciated. We have been overwhelmed, and we love this story, and we love that people love this story. So the way that we got to the Super Bowl commercial was basically we were going to do a holiday commercial. So Reindeer Games was our holiday commercial. That's where you guys met Owen. And you know, we had a lot of fun doing that commercial. We got to work with the community. We got to work with not only Owen, but we got to interview and audition a lot of players for that role. And when Reindeer Games, the holiday ad, did so well, basically the team kind of went, oh, let's really amp this up. And so we already had a group of kids that basically were like, that were in the audition that were in our audition process. So we basically went back and talked to them all. And I think the one thing that I super appreciate what the team did was that even though we had a story to tell for the holiday ad, for the Super Bowl ad, they really doubled down on making sure that the kids talked and that we got to see, you know, these kids and they could talk with their own voices. And that was something that was super important to us. Ian?
It's kind of related to the first question. So if anyone in the room is interested in building their own input devices to plug into the adaptive controller, what advice would you give them, and are there any resources available for them?
So we do have an input spec. Oh, sorry, the question was, do we have a spec to be able to build your own input devices. I will say that buttons are a very simple thing. You can take a headphone cable, cut it off, cut like the headphone cable off, take the wires, touch them together, and it'll fire the button. That's what an open switch is, right? You're completing the connection. So we do have a spec online that allows you to design and build your own buttons, as well as potentiometer-based devices for analog controls like triggers and joysticks.
I would encourage people to do that, just as a selfish person in healthcare who's looking for more inputs, and maybe lower cost inputs. Like, please take a crack at it and let us know what you have.
Yeah. Sorry, this side.
Okay, yeah. It's really great work with the controller. The thing that I'm wondering is how are you spreading this information to other healthcare? I'm from Norway, so
Oh, yeah, okay.
how would personnel in Norway get to know how to actually use this controller?
Yeah, I think that's a
Spreading that
great question, and a question that we hear a lot. And I think every time these guys put out another commercial, my inbox gets flooded with questions, right? So I'm doing a lot of talking, for those that are here you go. Microsoft does have some resources online. Bryce can speak to what you guys have online. And then I know some of the nonprofits also are starting to put out videos and information as well. So just reach out to the community. Yeah.
I mean, I do think that this is new ground for a lot of us, and I think there's a lot that we can all do to kind of put this information out into the world. But yeah, I would just encourage you to kind of keep at it, keep engaging with us, keep engaging with people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. We're all going to learn. If you think about how long it took to get to the form of what a modern controller is, and now we've opened up something that's like. There's a lot that we can explore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I am wondering about if you guys have plans for integrating or allowing this to be used as a controller with Windows mixed reality headsets or VR in general, because I know some games you use controllers, and I've helped try to give demos of VR games to some people in wheelchairs and with paraplegics, sure. And they love seeing these worlds that are typically 5 or 10 feet away through a small screen. They're in the world, and having a controller like this is so fundamental to that system, but I don't know how your teams are currently talking.
Okay. Windows 10 and Xbox One don't see the Xbox Adaptive Controller any differently than this. They're the same thing. So if your mixed reality game, you can work with a traditional Xbox controller. It will work with the Xbox Adaptive Controller.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, over here.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just first say thank you for making this, because you actually touched one of my friends' lives with this, and thank you so much for doing that. So my question is kind of from the research side of things. So with a lot of, this unfortunately isn't my area of human-computer interaction, but I know that there's a lot of research into input devices and the therapeutic effect that they have. Mm-hmm. And I've not yet seen any papers published on this. And, are there going to be papers published on the therapeutic effects of this? And also, could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Working in healthcare and medical research is slow.
Yes, yeah.
It's slow. There's a lot of rules about hurting or not hurting, and who you can work with and who you can't. So I do envision things will come out. If you do a lit review of just gaming and therapy, you already get a ton of things. Some of them are really old things right now, talking about really old devices, and that's, I think, because of the amount of time it takes to do research. But stay tuned. I mean, I would say it's coming. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Before I ask a question, I just want to give people a quick demo. Twin stick 3D world game, Minecraft, 2 sticks, one to look around, one to move. I've set this button with the adaptive controller to be like a shift key. It allows me to change what button values are, and it even allows me to swap sticks. So when I do this demo and you see me do this, now I'm looking, now I'm moving, now I'm looking, now I'm moving, right? Just so when you see me watch, so you know what's going on. Yeah, which side were we on? I guess this side.
That side.
Yeah. So I was just wondering how you arrived at the decision, especially with the massive enlargement of the buttons. How did you arrive at the decision to have a standard size D-pad on the adaptive controller?
So the D-pad is actually 150% bigger than our one on our regular controllers. I mean, I will say that you know, we knew we wanted a bigger one. I think that, in my personal opinion, I think that we could have. The D-pad is the one thing I wish we could kind of go back and look at the most. But yeah, it's 150%. It was really about symmetry. We didn't expect, we wanted to make sure that people had something that they could navigate the dash. And that was primarily what it was intended for.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi. I know that you talked about, hey, don't design specifically for the adaptive controller.
Don't.
Yeah, okay, so I was thinking though, let's say if people did start creating something like Alt Control GDC or Nintendo's Labo or another Steel Battalion, would you be concerned about the standards of the controller being made overcomplicated again, or do you think it's...
we've gotten the Alt Control GDC question today, and I will say I really did try to get something in there this year. I just kind of ran out of time.
Yeah.
So when I say don't design for the controller, I mean, if someone wants to create something unique, the last thing I ever want to do as someone who makes platforms is tell a game designer how to design anything, right? Like, so if someone wants to create something unique with this device, I am happy to do that. I get concerned when people want to break a game down in a simple way that is far too focused on this device. And what I mean by that is that if you made something that would work with this device, it would also make games with a typical controller better for people with limited mobility as well.
Okay, so just think broader, not specific.
Yeah, but I mean, I think your idea of, I mean, one of the things that came up really early on was that someone built a joystick that uses potentiometers that they could stand on, and they could literally lean on it like a pogo stick, and it would go like, you know, and that'll work. You know, when people ask me, I think one of the things that we need to start talking about soon, like Ian kind of suggested, was the maker community, right? And so when people ask me, when people don't quite get what this thing is, and they're like kind of entrenched in gamer culture, I basically go, hey, you could build a wicked arcade cabinet with this thing. And then they get it. Like, you know, that's really kind of it.
Cool.
So kind of an opposite question. Do you have any intentions of making a standard peripheral that could be used by somebody who has no prior knowledge of how to set up a gaming controller or how to operate something like this?
So, so the question, as I understand it, when you say this, you mean specifically the Xbox adaptive controller?
Yeah, I mean things like buttons that you didn't necessarily have to make out of a headphone wire yourself. Or,
yeah. So, I mean, I will say that that's one of the areas that we need to work on. We recognize that, and the challenge is that, as you saw from our examples today, there's a huge range of ability. So when someone comes up to me or Aaron or someone who's basically in this field, we can typically quickly come up with a rig that probably works for them, but we certainly recognize that might not be the easiest thing for people. So we need to tell better stories of how people can use this device, because I know that now that the commercial's out, you know, people get how kids with one hand can use this device, but that's not a broad enough group of individuals, right? So we need to tell those stories better. We need to continue to basically give people this inspiration about how they can build devices with this. And you know, for us, this is the start of the journey. We're trying to figure out what's next.
Cool, thanks.
Want to play more Minecraft? So yeah, so movement, auto jump. When I hold this, it's jump, right? But when I shift, right, okay, let me shift. So when I shift, all of a sudden this button is now, oops, or it isn't. Did I break it? Oh yeah, now it's mine. So think of that, like not only are we swapping the sticks with the shift button, we're swapping what buttons are.
And that's a great way to reduce the number of buttons you might need, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we use that demo, and then the other nice thing about the big buttons is that, you know, you can hold this thing and still hit these big ones, like while you're holding it. Hey, we got another question.
You guys are clearly leading. Is this on?
I will repeat your question.
Yeah. You guys are leading this on the Windows 10 Xbox front because you said it's seen as a regular Xbox controller. Has there been any talk about collaborating with the other platforms or phones and Android, iOS?
Yeah, no. So when we launched the Xbox Adaptive Controller, or when we announced it, Phil said that we would share our knowledge with the world. We are completely open to working with other companies. I cannot speak for other companies, but what I can tell people is that we share all this knowledge. I run a facility at Microsoft called the Inclusive Tech Lab. I've had all kinds of developers that are not Microsoft game developers. You know, actually Robert spoke at one of our events today, and he's from Wizards of the Coast. Wizards has come by the lab a bunch of times. We are very open to sharing what we know with the community, but I can't speak for any other kind of development house. But I actually, you know, so I can't talk for them.
Gotcha. Thank you, though.
How you guys doing?
Ian's coming back up.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, yeah. Oh, Ian's sitting back down.
You know us. Well, no, ask Ian. Come on. No one's kicking us out yet. I'm not seeing anybody yelling at us. Are you? Yeah. Yeah, all right, cool.
Oh, all right, cool.
So it was just another question related to the maker community.
Yep.
So you mentioned one thing like the giant oversized controller. I mean, already there's been tons of people making loads of really cool, interesting stuff. So just wondering if you have any favorites.
Any favorites from the maker community?
Yep.
Well, I mean, the one thing that I think for many of our teams that was really tricky was all of the charities that we worked with are makers. So like, you know, when we would start to talk with marketing about, oh, we're going to do a maker beat next, like, you know, they were like, what? And they didn't quite get it. And they didn't quite realize that, like, you know, people with disabilities are like the original life hackers. Like, let's get real, right? Like, so all of these folks, we are here to learn from them and kind of build off them. Do I have favorites? The Limbless guys are here. I could talk about their stuff. I'm really excited about their work. The Limitless guys are doing some amazing stuff with prosthetics, and there's you know, really great potential for how we can think about it.
Cool. That's our
Thank
cue.
you.
Thank you.